Welcome to the Leadership Intelligence Podcast. Today we'll be sharing some insights from the soon-to-be-released book, Engagement Magic: 5 Keys for Engaging People, Leaders, and Organizations. My name's Charles Rogel, and I'm a senior consultant and the vice president of product development for DecisionWise. I'm joined today by Dr. Tracy Maylett.
Hi, Charles. Good to be here. Thank you.
Tracy is the CEO of DecisionWise and holds a doctorate in organization change from Pepperdine University. He's the author of the book Engagement Magic, which we'll talk about today, and he's also the co-author of another book, The Employee Experience: How to Attract Talent, Retain Top Performers, and Drive Results. So Tracy, let's start off talking about some of the changes or what's happened in the world of engagement in the past 4 years since we released the book Magic originally. So this is kind of the re-release of Magic. It's now called Engagement Magic with a slightly different title, but it has new content in it. So what has really changed over the past 4 years that would prompt the new release?
Well, it does have different content. Yeah, it's about 25-30% different from what it was originally when we first looked at it. The first piece is that engagement has taken on a new meaning outside.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to see what's happened with engagement out there. The term engagement, we use this phrase in our organization here at DecisionWise that they've usurped the term engagement. And what that means is that basically engagement means so many different things now that may not have meant 5 years ago.
Right.
So it was interesting. You've talked to me about some of the things that you've seen in trade shows and things like that when people talk about what engagement is.
Yeah. So you go to the SHRM conference and you walk around and look at all the booths, and everyone on essentially, well, I'd say most of the booths had something to do with engagement. Uh-huh. And I went to like the Hillshire Farms booth just to get some of their samples, and they're talking about how gift giving and engagement are tied together. Others that are offering like insurance and benefits programs talk about how it boosts engagement. Others had booths that had things about wellness programs.
Yeah, Fitbits for engagement. And things like that.
Yeah. So everyone's kind of co-opting the term engagement because they realize it's a hot term and everyone's interested in it, and they're saying that our products and services and solutions help engage your employees. And
I can't say I disagree with that. I think their engagement has so many different forms, and I think so many of these organizations have taken that term and, like you say, co-opted it, saying that this is what engagement is all about.
Yeah.
And we can at least help increase that. So that's an example of one of these things that we're seeing so much of these days, which is engagement now means it's taken on a much broader definition or much broader idea of what engagement really is. And in the one sense, that's good because people are realizing what engagement really does and the value of engagement. There's a reason why they're taking these terms.
Yeah.
That goes to my second point, which is what we're seeing out there right now, is that CEOs of organizations and people beyond just the human resources room are now starting to realize, and they have over the last 5 years, that engagement really does have that financial impact. It really impacts what happens, the effectiveness of the organization.
Yeah, and we've seen a steady increase year over year as we've conducted our State of Employee Engagement survey with HR leaders. And we've asked them specifically, so does your executive team understand engagement, believe in engagement? And those scores have gone up year over year where, it is a top priority for most executive teams to boost engagement in their organization.
Yeah, I think that is probably one of the biggest changes we've seen over the last 5 years, is that understanding that engagement does impact the bottom line. Mm-hmm. And because of that, many of these organizations that we see that you just mentioned are finding that there are pieces that they may play in that engagement role, but because of that, the term engagement has maybe lost some of its really what engagement's all about.
Yeah.
This goes to some of the things that we're writing about in the book, and I'll talk about a little bit more here later. I hope we get a chance to address that. But the idea that engagement really is more than just a feeling that you have. Engagement is not happiness. And I think organizations today are unfortunately moving away from that concept more of what engagement really is. The idea that engagement has two parts. One of those is that you must feel something. So I feel engaged in what I'm doing. And that's what many of these organizations are trying to tackle. It is that feeling. I feel something. But engagement also implies doing something as well. It doesn't do me any good just to be happy unless I actually do something about that. And that's the area that I'm unfortunately seeing many organizations today moving away from, is that concept that, it's great to feel something, but really you need to do something about it. And that's one of the differences we're starting to see, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think the other trend was, everyone jumped on the bandwagon of engagement, really trying to increase engagement in the organization, but it was really tackled, like you mentioned before, at this organization level. So what can we do as an organization to make people feel more engaged? And they're missing out on a few other components, I think, to make it work.
Exactly, and that's what I want to address here in just a moment. One of the things that we found in writing this book is that engagement really does happen at 3 different levels.
So let's talk about those. So you mentioned that there's probably 3 or 4 new discoveries that you've made about engagement over the past few years, and that's kind of more the basis for the new release. So what are these new things that we should be aware of when we're thinking about engagement?
We start the book off, right? I think the first section is called Beyond Magic. And it starts off with the idea that it talks about what an employee engagement survey is, and that was really kind of where we were in 2014. And it talks about our background going back over 20 years. We actually started doing our first engagement surveys about 20 years ago within DecisionWise. And at that time, the concept of employee engagement was largely unknown. So I'll just read a little piece from this. It says, companies had just begun to understand the idea of employee satisfaction and the notion that maybe, just maybe, the employee experience had some impact on the bottom line. If it truly did impact the bottom line, wouldn't it make sense to measure what employees felt? And thus the idea of the employee survey began to catch on. As our firm spent the next decade knee-deep in employee survey administration and data, themes began to emerge. First, it was clear that engagement does impact the bottom line. There is no doubt that organizations with higher levels of employee engagement tend to outperform other organizations in financial measures, customer service, employee retention, quality, innovation, and a host of other key performance indicators. So, Charles, that's the first thing that we reaffirmed as we went through this over the last 4 years, that there's no question that engagement really does impact the bottom line.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think people get mixed up, where we're saying engagement really drives performance. So it really empowers people or motivates people to do their best work, really contribute at a high level, and try to perform at their best.
Exactly. The second part of that is, and I'm again reading from the section Beyond Magic. Second, an excellent customer experience, or CX, is the direct result of a superlative employee experience, or EX. Thus, if an organization wishes to drive customer satisfaction, it has to first start with the employee experience. So now the term employee experience has gotten a lot more momentum.
Yeah.
It's even catching up to the idea of employee engagement, that really it depends on that experience that I have in the organization. And my experience translates directly into the way I see the customer. So the way I see my own employee experience has a direct correlation with the customer experience. We can correlate this very clearly now. Our data show, there's no question about this, that my own experience as an employee translates to the way I'm going to treat that customer. So I think that's the second real point that we found over the last few years, is that direct relationship that we can now very clearly prove through research.
And that's huge for companies that especially have a large population of their workforce that's customer facing. So you think about like retail,
Sure.
Restaurants, other service industries, for example. If your employees are facing customers, it's imperative that they're engaged.
You're right. Absolutely. That there are a lot of experiences that every one of us have when we're treated right by a provider or a vendor or a retail clerk or whatever that may be. But it goes beyond that also, and that's what about the person, the man or the woman on the assembly line, and that is, who is their customer, and them being able to see that little piece that they may be soldering on to this device may have an impact on that customer, and really caring about that as well. They're not going to care about that end result if they don't have a positive employee experience.
Exactly.
So that's the second point, really being able to tie the employee experience to the customer experience. The next one is that we've found that engagement is a competency. So I'm going to read again from the book. Excuse me for doing this. It says, third, we discovered that engagement is a competency. This was a monumental find, as it meant that engagement can be learned, practiced, taught, measured, and even expected of employees and managers, and that they can be held accountable for engagement. This also meant that engagement wasn't simply something that was felt. It required that action. So that was a third discovery over the last few years, that engagement truly is a competency. We can hold people accountable for that competency. We can hold managers accountable for creating an engaging environment. We can teach engagement. We can teach that concept of how can I practice engagement. It's something that we can measure. We do many employee surveys every year. And then most importantly, we can expect engagement out of individuals and managers if engagement truly is a competency.
Yeah, I mean, so there are certain behaviors that drive engagement that a manager can do.
Absolutely. And that's what we've added. One of the chapters of this book here is what are some of those things that the organization, we call them engaging people, that chapter. Engaging people is what are those things that the organization can do? What are those things that a manager and team can do? And then what are those things that I as an individual have to do myself?
Excellent.
Which leads to the fourth point, the fourth real key finding. And this is a big one. It may not sound like it right on the surface until you think about it for just a moment. So right now, engagement, if you picture kind of a bullseye, 3 concentric circles, and on the outside circle is the organization. The inner circle would be, inner being the second circle, would be the manager or the team level. And the middle section, that very middle circle, would be me as an individual. So you picture engagement on 3 different levels: the organization level, the team level or manager level, and also the me level or the individual level. What we found is that organizations have, over the last 5 years, really started to do a fairly decent job of tackling engagement at the organizational level. So you see this in what you do every day. Organizations are saying, all right, we just got our survey back. We're seeing that we have a problem with X, and we have some real benefits in this area. So let's, at the organization level, address it. And so we're seeing that being addressed over the last 5 years. Fantastic. But what's happening is those organizations are also ignoring 2 levels that are extremely important. One of those levels is the manager level. So we have a section in here that's entitled The Engaging Manager, and we have some interesting research that we found. I'm just going to read a little section of this. And it says, as a follow-up to our 2016 research on the impact of a manager's engagement on that of a team, our researchers' 2018 findings emphasized just how critical that relationship is. These researchers found that when a manager's own level of engagement increased just 1 percentage point from one year survey to the next, we could expect to see a 213% increase in the odds of that manager's employees engaging in their work.
Yeah, it's huge.
We've also found that there's a huge correlation between the way I perceive my manager and my overall engagement. Okay, so I'm 12 times more likely to have a positive view of my own engagement or be fully engaged if I have a positive view of my manager. So what it really does is say managers play a critical role in engagement. It's not just the organization we need to address. We need to address the manager as well.
Yeah, because that local experience that the employee has, I mean, that's kind of their whole world for the most part, is the team they work on and their direct manager. There's some influence that the organization has in terms of communication, other policies and things that happen. But for the most part, it's that localized experience that they have on a day-to-day basis that really drives their engagement.
Exactly right. The last part of that 3 circles, or that bullseye, is the individual piece. So while we're tackling it at the organizational level, we're saying, okay, as an organization, we in human resources or we in the C-suite are going to enact these things in the organization. Fantastic. So we've been doing this for the last 5 years. And then now what we're starting to hear is CEOs coming back to us or HR coming back saying, we did all these things, but engagement hasn't changed. Well, that's because we need to also attack the manager level, like you just talked about. But also within that is individuals have a responsibility to engage themselves as well.
Yeah.
So we've added a section in here that's called the engaging individual. And the idea being that an individual owns his or her engagement as well. So we have a number of statistics in here that are provided that said the organization can do lots of things. The manager can do certain things, but unless I as an individual choose to engage, it doesn't make a difference at all. So I guess what I'm really trying to say here, and one of the key areas of this book, is to say we have to tackle engagement at 3 levels. The organization level, great, which is something that organizations have been doing now for the past decade, and they're doing a good job of it. But they're not tackling most organizations at the manager level. Are we willing to hold managers accountable for engagement? Are we willing to work with that manager to help improve her own level of engagement, but also how she's able to create an engaging environment for the team? Most organizations would answer no to that question. And then finally, the middle, the very center of that bullseye, which is, am I willing to engage myself? And many organizations, most, are not tackling that middle level.
Yeah.
And that's what this book is about. How do we engage at all three of those levels? In fact, the title of the book, is, as you know, is Engagement Magic, 5 Keys for Engaging People, Leaders, and Organizations, because it really does address the 3 levels when most organizations really only tackle 1.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the ownership usually is felt by the executive team, but once you start sharing that with managers, once you're able to empower individuals and show them their ownership and their contribution, so to speak, in their own engagement, then you start getting a lot more traction. It's not just the organization initiatives we keep needing to work on year after year.
Exactly right.
Excellent. Well, Tracy, thank you very much for the new insights into the new book, Magic 5 Keys for Engaging People, Leaders, and Organizations. The book will be released in early July of 2019. January 2019. You can pre-order it now at any major retailer. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we look forward to having you join us on our next podcast.
Thank you.